I'm your host, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business owners. Hello, humans. I am your guest, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business. I talk with sales and HR experts, other small business owners, and anyone else that can provide you with information to clear your way to success. My guest today is James Protin, owner of Protin Group, owner of the Protin Group, host of the James Protin Podcast, speaker, author, leadership coach, director of business development at GPI. James started his career in project management. After 8 years, he transitioned to business development and marketing. He spent the next 15 years working for engineering and consulting firms as the director and VP of business development and marketing. In 2015, James started the Protin Group, providing strategic consulting services focusing on business development, advocacy, marketing, public relations, and leadership coaching. In 2020, he was brought on as the director of business development at GPI. James was a board member for Leadership Washington County, president of the Mon Valley Chamber of Commerce, chairman of the BVA Charitable Trust. In February of this year, 2022, he entered the world of podcasting. The James Protin Podcast highlights people with powerful stories that focus on love, faith, gratitude, forgiveness, and redemption. James, thanks for being a guest on Clearing the Way.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's kind of get into, let's start childhood. Let's kind of work up to when you started your business, but also, I mean, a lot of your career has focused on business development.
Sure.
And some of those things that can be pretty important for small businesses to know. So let's kind of start in your youth.
Well, I'm Washington County guy, born and raised, Charleroi, PA, right down on the Monongahela River, just on the other end of the county. I'm old. I just in the 60s and 70s, growing up as a kid, this was it was a different place than what it is now.
Okay.
You know, always has been a great place to live and was an awesome place to be a kid. I mean, actually, I say Charleroi. I went to Charleroi High School, but I grew up in Fallowfield Township, so it was almost like a Huckleberry Finn type childhood. I mean, you're out jumping in the creek, catching salamanders, and just always out in the woods and just doing that kind of stuff. And so it was I would say idyllic, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Any athletics or anything?
Yeah, I played sports, as a young kid, baseball, basketball, football. Played football in high school. That was the only sport that I played at that point.
Okay.
But enjoyed that. My dad was a teacher and a coach, football, basketball, and all those things. So that kind of rolled into that.
So he was at what level was he a coach?
High school.
Okay.
High school. He actually coached. He was on a staff at Charleroi football and basketball. And back in the 50s and the 60s, so won a couple of championships with that.
And you didn't get into you didn't play basketball?
I did play basketball in high school, which was much to his chagrin, I think, because he thought that's the way I would go. But especially in the 70s, it's still that way now. But back then, we were a football first kind of region.
Okay.
Right? It was always like, if you weren't a football player, you really weren't an athlete.
Yeah. Okay.
And the best part of it is I didn't even like it. You
didn't like football?
I didn't like it. I didn't like. I played because that was like what you were supposed to do. Because I was about the height I am now, about 6 foot 6'1". But I couldn't weigh 140 pounds soaking wet. And if you're going to play football, large objects run into you.
That is
large
true.
Humans.
That is true.
And I wasn't a big fan of that.
What position were you?
I was a receiver. I was a wide receiver.
Okay.
So on a team that maybe threw 6 or 7 passes the entire season, right? So it wasn't like
you're just out there blocking. That's it.
Just taking up space.
Okay. And how about school as a student? What kind of did you get good grades?
I think I was a good student. I was very bright and curious, but I was kind of uninterested in the book stuff, right?
Okay.
I mean, so I was more curious about life, about the world that was happening outside of the building.
Okay.
So I did enough to get, because my father was a teacher in my high school.
What did he teach?
He was a social studies history teacher.
Okay.
So, and he was probably the most popular teacher in the school. So like everybody knew him, right? He was that guy. Every school has one of him. And he was Charleroy's at that time. And so I did enough to get by, to keep him happy, but I was a solid BC student, and I didn't set the world on fire. I was no threat to the valedictorian at any point in time in my career.
Okay.
So
what? So, with your dad as a teacher, what was that like? Like, did that create any? I mean, you said you kind of did enough to get by.
It was interesting because all of the teachers had an expectation that like wasn't really realistic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is there was 1, 2, 3 other of my classmates that I was very good friends with whose parents were teachers at the school as well.
Okay.
So it was just that one group. We were all the same age, and our parents not only were they colleagues, they were friends.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting dynamic, especially for those teachers that were like coaches who were involved in athletics, and like my father was. So, but I think looking back, I thought at the time it was an unrealistic expectation academically, right? Because I'm not that guy. I'm not, But looking back now, I realized that they just wanted me to do the best I could.
Yeah.
So and I didn't always give it 100%. I was a typical teenager, and it was the 70s. There were different kind of distractions as there are today, but there's still distractions nonetheless.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, my academic career as far as high school was very average.
Okay.
Very
and
average.
did you have an idea of what you wanted to do from there? Like,
listen, when I walked when I walked to commencement, I was going to go to school and I was going to be a teacher and do a little coaching because I watched my dad. Okay. And I tell you, my father, he passed away in 2017. He was a great guy, had a great life, no regrets. He told me not long before he died that he got to go every single day of his adult life and do exactly what he wanted to do every single day.
That's cool.
Right? I mean, he wanted to be a teacher. He played basketball in college, went to Cal, played basketball in college. He got to coach some basketball, be around, the athletics, and he got to teach. And it amazed me how many lives he touched in a little town like Charleroy, because, obviously everything grows exponentially. But that's what I was going to do. But I didn't really know when, because I was a young high school graduate.
Yeah.
I started my senior year of high school at 16. So I turned 17 in January of my senior year.
Because you started early, or you skipped?
Because back then, but again, I was average.
Maybe in middle school, maybe in middle school,
average guy.
Yeah, but in middle school.
No, it was interesting because you could start school earlier. They didn't have, it wasn't as stringent as it is now.
Okay.
And my mother is somebody you should have on the show because my mother was the true definition of an entrepreneur before that word even was ever uttered. Because she's always been in business, she's always worked, and so with my dad teaching and my mother working, so it was like the easiest thing to do is just like put him in kindergarten.
Well, what did she do?
She did a lot of things. Ultimately, she ended up spending most of her professional life in the travel industry back when there were travel agents and travel agencies. And ultimately did really, really well for herself. But she did. When I was very young, she went to school. She got an associate's degree in business because she managed a retail operation. So she did a little bit of everything. She was a true entrepreneur.
Huh. Okay. And at any point,
and this is like in the 60s when and she was in her 20s and women weren't like really doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
That had to be an interesting little journey she had.
It was interesting. It was fascinating. Yeah.
So at any point did you think so let's just kind of move because we'll get to this point. But okay, so you thought you were going to be a teacher at some point. You graduated, then what? Well,
I graduated and then really kind of just hung out. I got, a little job, for that summer and I had intended on going to Cal to be a teacher, but as the summer went on, I became less and less interested in formal education. Okay. So
you said that you didn't the normal subjects weren't really super interesting for you. Did you have anything that you gravitated toward that was actually in school or I'll leave it at that for now.
The things that the classes that I really were interested in when I was in high school were more of the subsets of the English department.
Okay.
Right. So that was composition and, and writing and things, of that nature. But I didn't realize at the time because it wasn't something I liked to do. I didn't write poetry or
Yeah.
stories or anything like that. But I was interested in those types of things, and that got me really into reading. And I've
Okay.
always enjoyed reading.
Okay.
So that was kind of like, math and science, which sounds a little bit ridiculous since I've spent 40 years in the engineering industry, but math and science really didn't do it for me,
Okay.
So I was more into the kind of the reading and writing and that type of thing.
Okay. So you lost interest in the formal education for however long. So what happened there? What were you kind of gravitating towards at that point?
At that point, I was kind of I hit that point that you get in as a young man in your life where you start to just question everything. You start to question authority and this and that and the other. And like there were things that I couldn't do, right? I couldn't go to work in the mill. I couldn't go in the Army if I wanted to because I wasn't 18 years old.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of kicked around in with this little kind of part-time job and trying to figure out what I was going to do. And my parents were really cool about it. And honestly, there are times where I look back and I kind of wish that had booted me in the ass, and got me. But they went with it because they were pretty unique in their own right. My dad was, I think, about 7 years older than my mother. So my mother had me at 20, right?
Okay.
So she was young.
Yeah.
And she was kind of like, in the 60s, this hippie chick and my dad was older and he was in his career and he was a jazz and blues guy. There was always music at my house, always music, but it was very eclectic, right? I'd go from Miles Davis to the Grateful Dead, So it was like really like eclectic as far as that goes, but there was always music. I remember that. And so they kind of went with it. And then it got to the point where when the class after me would have been like late spring of the following year, my dad, I was 18 then, he said, okay, look, I mean, now you got to do something. Yeah. So I did get a job in a mill and I did that for a while. I worked in the mill long enough to realize that that's not what I wanted to do for a living, So then those are the experiences that kind of had me gravitate towards school and think, okay, this is what I got to do, right? So I got to take one half a step back to tell you what happened next because I had my high school sweetheart. So she was a couple of years younger a year younger than me, but 2 grades behind me. So we were, what we did back then. We were hopelessly in love, right? But we were actually just really immature and had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah.
So we got pregnant, got married, and my oldest child is 41. So we were very young whenever
How
we
old
had
were
her.
you?
I was like 21.
Okay.
Yeah, and she was 20. So we really didn't know what we were doing, But we said, well, here we are. So now we've got this selfish little human that wants to eat and have all these things, right? And she was all that. So that started a journey that I never planned.
Yeah.
But okay, this is what it was, right? So we started walking down that path, and it was a struggle. We were young. We didn't have a lot of money. We made ends meet, and then we had my son 2 years later, and then a couple years after that, we had another daughter. So here I was, 26 years old, 3 kids.
And were you in the mills at that point, or
at that point? I had got out of the mill. And I was that's when I started to kind of really think, okay, this was not a good idea, right?
Okay.
So, and at the same time, my ex-wife now, which will tell you where this is going, she was thinking the same thing, and we really came to the conclusion together that, we were really a couple of youngsters that made an adult decision.
Yeah.
Now, looking back, it was the right decision to make. And we created 3 amazing children. All 3 are college graduates. All 3 are very professional. We have 6 grandchildren. And so, that part of it is just beautiful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the marriage ended badly. It ended in a divorce. And anybody who says that they had an amicable divorce, call bullshit on that. They're lying to you. There's no such animal, right? And we tried that. It didn't work. It didn't work. So, when I think about that, I think, she needed to grieve the loss of that marriage, just like anybody would need to grieve a loss, right? But I didn't see that then because I was selfish. It was all about me then. I was selfish. So that made it much, much worse. If there was one thing in my life that I could do differently, I would still, that marriage still would have to end.
Yeah.
But I would handle the divorce differently.
Okay.
Okay.
So you were selfish then? I mean, what age were you at that point? You said like 26, 27?
Well, no, I was in my 30s. We
later.
Actually made it work. Yeah, we did everything we could to make it work. But it just progressively it just deteriorated.
Okay.
As we were trying, the harder we tried, the more obvious it was becoming that we were fighting a losing battle.
Yeah. So
right?
when you, if you don't mind getting into it,
not at all. One of the defining moments of my life. That divorce really impacted everything that happened after that, and really was the driver to who I've become.
Okay. So how were you, like, what do you mean by you were being selfish? Well, like, can you give me some examples,
sure.
or is this just an overall, I was
very ego driven at the time. Put it to you this way. I didn't like who I was.
Okay.
So
It's a bad starting point.
Exactly. So I would put on a different persona, what I thought would be acceptable and embraced by others, right? So instead of just being myself, because I didn't think myself was adequate. I didn't think I was enough. So I tried to be something that I wasn't, and I did a couple of different iterations of that, and none of them fit.
Okay.
So that made it even that much harder, because not only was I struggling with a relationship, I was struggling with a relationship with myself, an internal relationship.
So when you say a couple different iterations of yourself, what did that look like?
Well, it looked like trying to force myself into different careers, different jobs, right?
Okay.
And trying to be, something in the community that I wasn't ready for, and so it was just trying too hard to be something that I wasn't.
Okay.
Right? And force myself, like trying to force a square peg into a round hole is basically what it was. So, obviously now for me at 62 years old, it was obvious if I'd have just been myself and been this guy that's was inside me then.
Yeah.
Right? But now it's me, right? If I had just been me then, my life probably would have turned out differently, but you don't know that then, right?
Yeah.
And so being caught up in the moment and really wanting something impatiently, right?
Okay.
So I wanted to be here, but I didn't want to take the steps to get there. I want to be here now, right? And you push against that and push and push and push, and life pushes back.
Okay, so how did you? Okay, so were any of those things that you were trying to be, were they actually things that you were trying to be? Like the steps that you wanted to skip, would you have actually been happy if you were able to skip those steps and be at that end point? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And in hindsight, no.
Okay.
Right? So again, you life teaches you what you need to know when you need to know it, right? So, but let me go back to in the midst of that, toward the tail end of when my marriage was starting to really disintegrate, is how I found myself in the engineering business. Right, I got a job. It was a summer job at PennDOT. It was temporary, but I knew it could lead to something else, and it did. And this is how serendipity maybe is a good word for it. But I've always been a people person. I've always been able to communicate and talk to people, and so that is the one skill set, if you want to call it that, communication. That I've always had and that I've always been good at. So that's if I had to pick one thing in my life, that I was really, really good at. That's it, right? So I met a guy. I was out on a construction job. Was still doing the PennDOT thing. And I was on a construction job, and I met a guy named Bob Quinn, okay? And I was in my early, mid-20s, and Bob was the chief engineer for a local engineering firm, Westmoreland Engineering, which is now WEC Engineers, but they were in Menneson, PA. And we talked, and for whatever reason, he liked me. So I said, come on, let's talk. And so I went in, I talked to him, and they offered me a job as a draftsman, which I had no clue what that was. Right?
Had you graduated at that point?
No, I hadn't even, I had only been taking classes. I hadn't done anything of any structure. Right?
Okay.
So the thing that you'll see from our conversation, the most important, I would say, element of my career has been a work ethic, has been hard work. Mm-hmm. Okay. I learned early on that I was never going to be the smartest guy in the room. Right. But I also learned early on that there's no reason anybody should ever outwork me. Okay. And that's how I've come through. So I started out as a draftsman, which is, the very kind of like entry level of an engineering firm. And this was before CAD and all those things. This was on a board with ink, right? So, are you familiar with AutoCAD? Uh-huh. Okay, well, I worked on the beta version of AutoCAD. That's how I predate that. Okay. So, yeah. So I had a talent, an ability that I didn't know I had because if you'd asked me when I was a senior in high school what an engineer was, okay, I'd have said it was somebody that drives a train because my grandfather was a railroader, and to me, that's what an engineer was. Uh-huh. I had no idea. Civil engineer, structural, I didn't know. Right? So here I find myself in the engineering business, working for an engineering company, and just started to increase and move up through the ranks, became a project manager, project engineer, and opportunities started to present themselves as I started to network within the industry, and I improved my situation, went to another firm and into another one, and when I was divorced and I turned 40, and I was working on a project, and there was another engineering firm, Chester Engineers. One of their senior people was we were on the project together, although I was at a different firm. And he said to me one day, he pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, we have an opportunity for a project manager. I mean, why don't you come and talk to us?" So I said, "Yeah, I'm interested in talking, but I got 3 kids, and maybe there's a chance I can make some more money or whatever the case may be." And I was motivated by money at that point, not because I wanted to buy a Mercedes or I wanted to live in a certain way, but because I had kids to feed. Yeah. Right. So I went and I met a guy named Bruce Fletcher, Swaggy B. I can sit here for 3 hours and tell you Swaggy B stories, and they're all true, although you would not believe any of them. But Bruce Fletcher was executive vice president, Chester Engineers, and he brought me in as a project engineer, senior project manager, and gave me some clients in the municipal consulting, and we did a bunch of projects, did some really good stuff in the first couple of years I was there, and I was generating new work and new clients just organically, right, over the course of my day. So he pulled me aside one day and he said, "Hey, listen," he said, "You're doing really good with revenue generation and all that." And up until that point, until I was 40, I never thought about the business side of what I do. Okay. I was purely a project guy. Uh-huh. We were designing, we were building things, water and wastewater plants, roads, everything you could think of. That was what really kept my interest in that industry. So at that point, I'd been in it for, almost 20 years. It was like 16, 17 years. And so I'd kind of forgotten about the teaching thing. And along the way, I had cobbled together enough credits that I could get an associate degree in mechanical engineering, technology, things like that. So I was kind of committed at that point. Yeah. Right. So, and I talk with my hands. I apologize that, but I did. I get that from my mother too. But so at that point is when I went about 20 years ago when I went into business development and marketing full time,
Okay.
right, for the engineering company. So I did that through 2015, and we had a lot of success. We grew the company actually from $5 million a year to over 30 in 5 years. So we had we did that largely because we brought in a consultant to help out because, again, I wasn't a marketing or business development professional. I was making it up as I go. And I just was a people person.
Yeah. So when you switched over to that, did you like what first? Let's start with what were you brought on to do? Okay, business development, marketing. What do we mean by that?
Business development is basically strategic sales.
Okay.
Okay, marketing is what it is. Marketing is branding and all those things. So the way I look at it, and I have always looked at it, is sales plus marketing is business development, right?
Okay.
Because so it's not just like, when you sell something, because in the engineering industry, you're selling a professional service. So I can't show you something, it's not like I'm selling you a Cadillac or a house, which, and I don't, not to minimize those things because those are very difficult things to do. But when you're selling a service, you've got to have some strategy behind it, right? So how you present that and how you present it in the marketplace to your target client base, that's kind of the business development piece of sales.
Okay. So, So you're brought onto that. So you bring in this consultant.
Yes, Marvin Williams, who to this day, 20 some odd years later, is working with me again. We've come full circle.
That's cool.
And he's still teaching me. He taught me everything I know about that part of the business. And Marvin is legendary in this industry nationally. So the great thing about, again, getting back to focus on the networking and the serendipity of it, right? So not looking for another job back when I went into Chester Engineers, right? I just was working on a project, doing what I love to do. Guy said, hey, I love the way you do this. I love the way you carry yourself and handle clients. We have an opening. Why don't you talk to this guy? So then I meet Bruce Fletcher, right? And Bruce is going to be 80 years old, and he's one of my dearest friends. He's gone from being my boss to a colleague to a friend, right? And he's always been a mentor. So Bruce is the first guy that saw this in me, right? And he knew that there was something there that other people didn't see. So, and I was happy being a project guy. If I was still if none of that ever happened, if the business stuff never happened and I was still doing projects, I'd be a happy camper, right? I wouldn't be as engaged as I am. I wouldn't be making as much money. There's a lot of things would be different, but I would be happy.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was doing work that was rewarding to me. Okay.
So when you say he saw, what was this thing that you're talking about that he saw in you, or obviously like saying this thing is...
What I would say, and he might give you a different answer, but as I said, communication is if you took a dozen people, professionals from my industry, and asked them the first word that comes to mind when my name is mentioned, I bet at least 11 of them would say communication, communicate, or something like that. Because that's the one thing that I've been able to do is to network and build. And nobody ever taught me that. That's not something that somebody teaches you, you know. But if I go into a room with 500 people, okay, 499 of them are going to become my friend. That's my mission, right? So I've never had an issue just walking up to a total stranger and having a conversation. I've never had an issue, never been nervous standing in front of a group of people. I've talked to 1,000 people. I've talked to 2 people. So I do a lot of public speaking and those type of things. Never even gave never had a public speaking course, right? I actually had to stand up and give a technical presentation, a PowerPoint to a potential client for a project. There were about 100 people in the room, and I never done it before in my life. I didn't know enough about it to be afraid or to be intimidated. So I just did it. And then once you do it that one time, the rest is easy.
Where do you think that came? Like, obviously, it's not something you ever like worked on. But where do you think?
I think just from watching my parents.
Okay.
Because my father was a teacher, so obviously, teachers are presenters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And public speakers, and my mother, watching my mother, and what I didn't realize until I was much, much later in life is how much I knew about business from watching and listening to my mother. My
Okay.
mother was a great business person, and really, I never gave her enough credit for me. Because my dad and I are very similar.
Uh-huh.
He had the same kind of personality as me, but my mother really was a lot more kind of responsible for me learning and growing, as a young adult.
Okay. I mean, okay, that makes
Especially
sense.
professionally, especially in business.
Did you ever, what was your relationship with them as you were like moving through your career? Like, did you actually learn things from her? Like, did you go to her for advice frequently, like as you were growing, or?
Not necessarily advice. It was more, because she really wasn't that type of person but it was more just watching her do what she did and paying attention.
Okay. Okay. So you're in business development now, kind of killing it. What were some of those things, like, as you are learning this? Obviously, the communication side is kind of natural for you. What were some of the things as you're getting into that were a struggle for you?
The hard thing was really learning to track trends in the industry, right?
Okay.
So one thing, the most important thing I think that I do, obviously we track opportunities and we go and we develop relationships and build those things and things like that. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to know what our competitors are doing. Who's succeeding, who's doing what in the industry, what key personnel, professionals are moving from place to place, and so just being able to have the focus to track these things, and so I've never been a detail person. I've always been a big picture guy, big idea guy. So that nuts and bolts and learning to take really good copious notes and to pay attention and track industry trends, both opportunities and competitors and market analysis and things like that. Because again, I wasn't trained in any kind of business application.
And did you get good at that, or were you able to delegate? Is that something that you were able to delegate?
A little of both.
Okay.
I did get good at it because at Chester I was kind of a one-man gang. I had a marketing team that worked with me, but as far as when it came to the sales and business development, I was kind of a one-man gang. So I had to track all those things. Then I was able to bring on some people and then delegate. But and even now at GPI, I enjoy doing it now. It's something that I've gotten good at, and now I have a preferred way of actually receiving the information. So it's easier for me to just go out and grab it myself.
Okay. Okay. So at what point did you decide you were going to take all of this experience that you had and start doing it kind of on your own, at least for, I don't know how much you do that or how little you do that, but
it's actually an interesting story because at the end of 2015, I had there was an ownership change at Chester and the company was going in a different direction and I wasn't, we were butting heads. The new CEO, we were like oil and water. We had two different philosophies and, it just wasn't, it wasn't working and I was really getting burned out in the industry. So beginning of 2016, I thought, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I need a break. So we walked away from it, and then you got to eat, you got to pay the bills.
Yep, those are important.
I started with LLC, and thought, well, I'll do some because I had a 12-month non-compete in the engineering industry. So I know enough about marketing and this stuff now. I can do some consulting, and I did, I did pretty well. And I wound up once that non-compete was done. Then I picked up an engineering client and I started basically doing what I had been doing all along as a consultant, though. I wasn't like an employee.
Yeah.
So I did that and for a small firm and it was good, but it became obvious they really weren't going to invest to the level that I thought we had agreed upon, and not salary wise, not
Yeah.
that, but invest in the market and the industry and bringing in people and hiring engineers and things like that. So we kind of went our separate ways, and I got a call about that time from a dear friend of mine, Diane Altland, who I've known for over 20 years. She was an engineer at Chester for a while. We kept in touch and we stayed friends, and we would encounter each other through the industry and through all that time. And she said that she had got a new gig with a company, Greenman Peterson GPI, and she said she's been tasked to build and grow a water practice. It's a transportation-based company, and she knew that's what I did, right? So I'm thinking, Greenman Peter GPI, can't be good because I've never heard of them. And as I said, it was my responsibility to know who my competitors are. So I'm sitting there, if I never heard of these guys,
Okay.
What? So
Yeah.
So I kind of say, yeah, let me think about it. So I go online and I do the thing, and I look at their website. I look at them, and here they're almost 1,800 people, 60 offices. They're all. I'm thinking, how could I not know these people? Well, the reason was they are a top 10 firm globally in bridge design, highways, roads like that, not in the water space where I had spent my entire career.
Yeah.
Right. So it made sense that I wouldn't know who they are because that was outside the purview of what I had been doing for 30 some odd years at that point. So I called her back and I said, let's what are you thinking? So I took them on as a client, and I did that for a year, and she said, you really ought to come and do this full time. And I'm thinking, wow, do I want to do this full time? So then I talked to Miss Terry Lynn, my significant other, and I'll tell you a story about her in a minute. But so knowing that full well that she was going to say, oh, hell yes, because she wanted a steady paycheck. Because when you're a consultant, it's like you submit an invoice and your client, they pay it when they can pay it.
Yeah.
So you make X one month, and then the next month you're making Y, and the next month you're making Z, and she's like, when can I expect this? When can I expect that? So, and I knew what her opinion would be, but so I agreed to come back full time, and that's where I'm at now, and it's been about 2 years that I've been full time, and I'm senior vice president for business development for GPI. That's my official title, and I've never been a title guy, but I will tell you this. When I started in the industry, I was a draftsman, which I was the very most entry level. So without without a bachelor's degree, without a professional engineer's license, to go from there to be a senior vice president in a firm the size and scope of GPI, just really, for me personally, it kind of, I don't want to say justifies, but it really makes, remember I told you, there's no way anybody I was going to be the hardest worker in the room, right? It makes, to me, when I think that it's gratifying that hard work was worth it.
Yeah.
Right? So, because there was a lot, listen, when you're in that business, and you come up and you go head to head with another guy, even whether it's for a position, a raise or whatever, or a promotion, and this guy's got that professional engineering license, right? So, may not be any smarter than you, might not be any better than you, all those things. So he's got the upper hand, right? So I have to show in some fashion that my value. So that's, and the only option I had was to outwork him.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So taking it back a little bit, because you mentioned that divorce ended up really shaping the trajectory from there.
Yes.
But we didn't really get into that. What were those changes that you implemented or realized, or what were some of those things that happened that caused that big change? And what was the change? Just being less selfish? What happened there?
Actually, to put it bluntly, I was an asshole. Right? I mean, I just wasn't, let's put it this way. All things being the way they are, if I was that guy, I'm the last person you'd ever ask to be on this show. Okay? I was pretty much self-involved. I still listen. I gave the charity. I volunteered. I was on nonprofit boards. I was doing all the things here,
Yeah.
out here that wow, this is a great guy. Look what he's doing.
Yeah.
But in here, I was still selfish. It was all about me. I had a battle with my own ego because I still, even up until I was about 40 years old, coming out of that divorce, I still could not reconcile with myself who I was, because I was still in the back of my mind thinking, I really failed at this, and this. And, I didn't like myself. And that's about the time I realized that I needed to talk to somebody. And that's where Terry Lynn comes in, because I had met her and we had started to become involved. And she said exactly that. Yeah, you really need to talk to somebody, because you're like, there's...
Yeah.
I was angry and frustrated all the time, and little things would set me off, and not violent. I've never been a violent person, and I've never even been in a fight. I used to box when I was a kid, but I've never even been in a fight. But I was just angry, and I was dark all the time. So I started took some therapy, started getting into some therapy, and I realized that you know what, this is not who I was created to be. I wasn't put here to be this guy, right? So I realized that if I was going to do anything with my life, anything with any significant impact, I was going to have to change. I was going to have to first of all, find out who I am and do whatever I needed to do to become that guy. Right?
Okay.
So the first thing I had to do was acknowledge and accept what a jerk I was. Okay. And listen, that hurts. When you have when you got to face that, you got to look in the mirror and it's raw and you're right there. And you have to accept that, because you can't fix it until you accept what's wrong. So, that stung a little bit, because there were things that happened in my marriage. Again, there was no violence or anything like that, but there were things that happened in my marriage that I didn't realize.
Yeah.
So because I was angry all the time, and it was all self-loathing. It was all self-pity. So I had to start there. I had to break everything down so I could build it back up.
How long do you think after you started, and we don't have a ton of time here, we just have a couple minutes till 2.
We can go a little bit. We're good.
But how long after you started therapy, how long did it take for you to actually start acknowledging and kind of break through some of those barriers?
It took a while. I would say it took a good year, because I was in denial.
Okay.
I didn't want to accept it.
You went to therapy, but you were still in denial with the things that you were discovering.
Absolutely. Okay. I never did that. I was like, what are you talking about?
Well, that's so strange, because you were open enough to go to it.
Right.
But I
still didn't want to face it.
That's strange.
I did not want to face it. And years later, my children are all adults now, but I would talk to them and they would tell me, the things that bothered them, because we got to the point where the only time my ex-wife and I communicated at the end of that marriage, we were arguing, right?
Yeah.
And the kids unfortunately saw all of that, but the good thing is they've all become wonderful parents. And maybe it's because I set a bad example, but regardless, it worked out, right? So because they're awesome people. But Terry Lynn, more than therapy, more than anything, is the one that really pulled me out of that, because she was honest with me about everything. This was a person who I knew was in love with me. I knew, that I never doubted that for a second, but she never took any BS. She called it. She called me on everything, and she's the one that really kind of, I don't want to say forced, but guided me and maybe gently pushed to really sit down and take that good, honest, hard look in the mirror.
Did I imagine there was still some pushback? Like if you were going to therapy and there was the push, like the lack of acceptance there, I imagine there still had to be some of that with her as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I used to get offended. It's like I used to think she was overly critical, and I'd say, you're mean to me. She says, no, I'm honest with you. you're always criticizing me. No, I'm telling you the truth. Because she knew, again, like I told you that, Bruce Fletcher saw something. Well, Terry Lynn saw the same thing. And it whatever reason, she invested in me, and she's been with me, and she's been my harshest critic and my biggest supporter since day one. So sometimes, and I've it's hard to explain, but I've seen that in myself. I've had some young people, engineers and different people that firm was given up on. They said, no. And I've intervened, and I don't know, I can't even really articulate what it was, but maybe I saw a little bit of myself in this guy. You know what I mean? And but you're blessed at times to have people. Nobody does it alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't get through life by yourself. You're going to have people at various points throughout your life that are going to boost you up. They're going to believe in you, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's 2 right now, so I feel like we could keep going for quite some time.
We keep going for a little bit. I'll let these folks know that.
Well, I mean, we can also. I can cut some of this too, but we could also reconvene in another down the road and cut this one as first
we
as
the first one. We actually haven't talked about business that much.
I know we haven't. Okay, so let's.
It's always a complex story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And business mirrors life. And I used to get very frustrated when people would say it's not personal, it's business. No. All business is personal.
Yeah.
All business is personal because it's all relationships. Business is a relationship based. If you want to succeed at anything, you have to know how to build and sustain relationships. So,
all right. So that's what we'll do. We'll do a second one. Get you out of here so you can get on your call. Anything else? I feel like we covered a lot of probably still some more of the life stuff to cover. But like you said, those will kind of intertwine. We'll catch that on the next one. Anything in closing? Anything?
I'd just like to thank you for having me. And, I'm not one to talk about myself. Just our podcast, for example, and I want to get you on our show, and we'll do that. We'll get that scheduled. But our podcast is about stories. Okay. So we are very conscious and we're very guest centric. Okay. So it's not about me. It's not about Nick, our producer. It's really about telling stories that people have transformed in some fashion. And it resonates with me because I had to go through that process.
Yeah.
So we've been blessed with some amazing guests and some amazing stories. And that's the thing, sometimes when I start to tell my own story, right? So I'll start to babble a little bit because I don't normally do that. But there are, and I'll go, oh, wait a minute, that was important. But I would love to come back and talk some more because I think I love the setup you have here. I love what you're doing and what you're all about here with your show. And again, if you want to talk about business and you want to really dig into it and what it takes, you got to talk about the personal.
Yeah.
I mean, because they're intertwined.
And I think that's something that, I know a lot of small business owners, especially right now with the popularity of like entrepreneurship and all of those things. It's like, everyone looks
We used to call them businessmen, by the way.
Yeah. Everyone looks at the great things.
Yeah.
And, the freedom and all this. It's like, yes, and.
Exactly. You're exactly right.
But here's all the other things that you need to be aware of because, the business side, you might nail that. Right. But when you're the one that's cutting your own check, and you're the one responsible for all of the things that have to happen to run the business.
That's very true.
The personal side can get a little squirrely, can get a little dicey. You can start to forget about some things.
They feed off of each other. If you have a bad month in business and you're not getting that paycheck because you're responsible, how can that not spill over your personal life, especially if you have a family?
Yeah.
And if you have your own business to run and you have an argument with your wife or your husband, your kids get in trouble in school, whatever the case may be. It all comes together.
Yeah. Okay. I will have all of your links down below. Podcast will be linked, all of those things. Next one will be, we'll get that on the schedule. We'll do a round 2.
Let's get it scheduled. Absolutely.
thanks for coming on. This was good. Anything else? Anything else to add?
No, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation and again, having you on our show.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks for listening and watching and doing all the things. Like, comment, subscribe, share it. See you next time. Thanks. I'm your host, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business owners.